Many Muslims believe wearing a hijab is required by the Qur'an, but when we examine the Qur'an itself, that requirement is not stated. Many Muslims commonly refer to a woman's head covering as hijab. However, the word hijab is never mentioned in the Qur'an as a head covering. These are the various references and meanings of the word hijab found within the Qur'an. In the interest of time, I won't explain each verse, but feel free to pause the video and review the meaning of hijab in each of these verses. As you can see, none of the references to hijab in the Qur'an refer to a woman's head covering. According to Edward Lane's lexicon, one of the meanings of hijab is a thing that veils, conceals, hides, covers, or protects. So to call a head covering a hijab is correct if the purpose of the head covering is to cover the hair, but that doesn't mean the Qur'an requires women to cover their hair. The verse that most Muslims use to claim a requirement for women to cover their hair is verse 31 of Qur'an chapter 24. It reads, "And say to the believing women that they should lower their gaze and guard their genitals, that they should not display their adornments except what is apparent of it, and let them draw their head coverings over their breasts, and not to display their adornments, except to their husbands, their fathers, their husbands' fathers, their sons, their husbands' sons, etc." Let's analyze this verse by breaking it up into 4 key clauses. And say to the believing women to not display their adornments, Arabic, zinatahunna, except what is apparent of it, Arabic, illa ma zahara minha, and let them draw their head coverings, Arabic, bihumurihinna, over their breasts, Arabic, juyubihinna, and not to display their adornments, Arabic, zinatahunna, except to their husbands, their fathers, etc. The context of this verse clearly has to do with a woman's adornments, which the verse tells women not to display. The Arabic word for their adornments is zinatahunna, which is even used twice in this verse. In general, the verse prohibits women from showing off their adornments. The reason for this is likely related to verse 59 of Qur'an chapter 33, which tells women to wear an outer garment to avoid being harassed, as wearing an outer garment helps hide a woman's adornments. Let's understand the key words in this verse. Zinatahunna. According to Edward Lane's lexicon, zinatahunna has to do with beautifying oneself or adornment to an extent that can become a cause of attraction, like makeup. Illa ma dhahara minha. This phrase means except what is apparent of it, where it refers to adornments, Arabic, zina. Bihumurihinna. This word means with their covering. The word khimar, plural, kumur, means covering, as indicated in Edward Lane's lexicon. Anything that covers something is a covering. A head covering is one kind of khimar, as it covers the head. This applies to both men and women. For example, in hot climates such as in the Middle East, you see men covering their heads due to the heat. In the US, people usually just wear a hat if it's hot outside. In the context of verse 31 of Qur'an chapter 24, this word can include a head covering, as that was a common form of covering at the time. Juyubihinna. According to Edward Lane's lexicon, in the context of the Qur'an chapter 24 verse 31, it means bosoms, breasts, or chest. With these definitions, the verse instructs believing women not to display their adornments or beautifications, except what is naturally apparent, like a beautiful face, eyes, etc., and to cover their breasts, which can be done with a head covering, and not to display their adornments or beautifications except to certain relatives. The mistake most people make is in clause 3. Although the verse tells women to draw their head coverings over their breasts, that doesn't mean that women must cover their head or hair. When this verse was revealed, it's likely that both men and women covered their hair, because Arabia was a very hot place. So the clause, "and let them draw their head coverings over their breasts," is not the same as, "and cover your hair, head, and breasts with a head covering." As an analogy, if we say, "and let drivers put their driver's license in their wallets," does that mean drivers are required to drive with a wallet and put their driver's license inside it? No, it doesn't. Just because people normally bring a wallet with them when they go out and drive somewhere doesn't require them to put their driver's license inside it, nor does it require them to even have a wallet. The obvious goal of the Qur'anic verse requiring women to cover their breast is because the breast is a private part, the exposure of which is shameful, unlike a man or woman's hair. Similarly, the goal of having your driver's license with you while driving is so you have required identification available, if needed. You don't have to put it in your wallet. If we assume that women must cover their breasts with a head covering, then the current understanding of covering one's breasts with only a shirt would be a violation of this verse. Does the verse require women to cover their hair? No. Nowhere does this verse even mention the word hair. If God really wanted women to cover their hair, he could have simply said, "And let them cover their hair and breasts with a head covering." But he didn't. Does the verse require women to cover their head? No. The reference to head covering is not an instruction to cover the head, since head coverings must have been commonly worn in Arabia when the verse was revealed. The verse suggests that covering the breasts could be done by drawing a long head covering over the breasts. Of course, nowadays, a shirt would do a much better job at covering one's breasts than a head covering could ever do. Some people may argue that head coverings, Arabic khimar, used in Arabia when the verse was revealed were not meant to protect people from the heat, but rather specifically to hide women's hair from men. This argument seems invalid, since verse 81 of Qur'an chapter 16 indicates that God created garments, one kind of which was to protect people, both men and women, from the heat. Here's an excerpt from verse 81 of Qur'an chapter 16. "And God has made for you, from that which he has created, shadows, and has made for you from the mountains shelters, and has made for you garments which protect you from the heat, and garments which protect you from your enemy in battle." The Arabic word used for garments is sarabil, which, according to Edward Lane's lexicon, means anything that is worn, so a head covering can be one such garment. The reference to garments to protect from heat further supports the argument that head coverings, among other forms of clothing, may have been worn to protect from the heat. Some people may argue that head coverings, Arabic khimar, are necessary for women to protect themselves from being harassed or from unwanted sexual advances from men. First of all, there is no verse in the Qur'an that says a head covering, per se, is to protect women from being harassed. Note that verse 59 of Qur'an chapter 33 mentions outer garments to avoid harassment, not head coverings. Secondly, women are just as attracted to men as men are to women. Women can also harass men. This is even proven in verse 23 of Qur'an chapter 12, where the wife of Prophet Joseph's master sought to seduce Prophet Joseph. In verse 32 of Qur'an chapter 12, we see further proof that the wife of Prophet Joseph's master seduced Prophet Joseph and even harassed and blackmailed him for refusing her. In fact, not only did the wife of Prophet Joseph's master seduce, harass, and blackmail Prophet Joseph, but she even got violent and ripped his shirt, according to verses 26 to 29 of Qur'an chapter 12. For the Qur'an to explain multiple times how a woman sexually harassed a man proves that women aren't the only ones who can be harassed because of their appearance. Considering this fact and the argument that women should cover their hair to avoid being harassed by men, then one could argue that men should also be required to cover their hair to avoid being harassed by women. However, there is no such requirement of this in the Qur'an, both for men and women. Therefore, the argument that women must cover their hair to avoid being harassed is invalid and not supported by the Qur'an. Some people will argue that a woman's hair is an adornment, and therefore it must not be displayed according to Clause 1, which reads, "They should not display their adornments." This argument is invalid because the natural beauty of one's hair is similar to the natural beauty of one's face and is therefore exempt according to Clause 2, which reads, "Except what is apparent of it." Furthermore, it is unreasonable to consider hair to be in the same category as breasts, especially since men also have hair, which can be a cause of attraction for women. Furthermore, not all women have beautiful hair. Some women have unattractive hair. For them, covering their hair actually could make them appear more beautiful. Therefore, we cannot simply assume that hair is an adornment or zina. The Qur'an does not explicitly classify hair as adornment or non-adornment. Therefore, it cannot be legislated as forbidden to show. Some Muslims will argue that a woman's hair but not a man's hair is their awra, and therefore it should be covered. In verse 26 of Qur'an chapter 7, we read that God created clothes for people, both men and women, to cover their private parts, or genitalia, Arabic, sawa, which, if displayed, is a cause of shame. Most people would agree that a woman's hair is one, not genitalia, and two, not a cause of shame or a private part, the same way their breasts are considered private. Regardless of this, God says in that same verse that however you choose to cover your body with clothes, what's most important is that you behave righteously. Note that according to Edward Lane's lexicon, the definition of sawa is aura, pudendum, genitalia, external portion of the organs of generation, reproductive parts, the anus, and parts that, if exposed, are a cause of shame. Notice in the screenshot, I highlighted the word aura. It is a synonym for so'a. You may be wondering why God would need to tell people He created clothes so people could cover their private parts, including breasts. This purpose of clothing may seem obvious to most, but keep in mind that even today, there are still tribes in many places around the world of people wearing nothing or barely anything. For example, the people of Koma in the northern part of Adamawa State in Nigeria are of the belief that if women wear clothes, they would incur the wrath of the gods, which may lead to their death or barrenness. This belief is just as nonsensical as the belief that women's hair, but not men's hair, is among their private parts. Earlier, we saw in verse 26 of Qur'an chapter 7 that the clothing of righteousness is the best type of clothing. So what is righteousness? The answer can be found in verse 177 of Qur'an chapter 2. Righteousness is not that you turn your faces toward the east or the west, but true righteousness is one who believes in Allah, the last day, the angels, the book, and the prophets, and gives wealth, in spite of love for it, to relatives, orphans, the needy, the traveler, those who ask for help, and for freeing slaves, and who establishes prayer and gives zakah, those who fulfill their promise when they promise, and those who are patient in poverty and hardship and during battle. Those are the ones who have been true, and it is those who are the righteous. Notice how righteousness from a Qur'anic point of view has absolutely nothing to do with the type of clothes women wear or how they wear them. Some women will claim that wearing the hijab is necessary or encouraged to support their identity as a Muslim. First of all, there is no such thing as Islamic clothing from a Qur'anic point of view. What people call Islamic clothing is nothing more than traditional garb that is commonly worn in Islamic countries. There is no verse in the Qur'an that says Muslim women need to identify themselves by wearing a hijab. Identity has nothing to do with righteousness. Consider, for example, some people mentioned in the Qur'an. Their identity as being married to or descendants of prophets may make you think that they were righteous when, in fact, they were the opposite. For example, most of Prophet Abraham and Prophet Noah's descendants were unrighteous. The wives of Prophet Noah and Prophet Lot, despite living with them, were unrighteous. Prophet Noah's son was of evil conduct. Prophet Jacob's sons tried to kill their brother, Joseph. Now, considering how evil Pharaoh was, you might think that his wife was also evil. Interestingly, Pharaoh's wife was actually righteous, despite being married to one of the worst evildoers of all time. Similarly, one's identity as a Muslim woman by wearing the hijab has nothing to do with righteousness from an Islamic point of view. This is no different than men who think they should have a long beard to identify themselves as religious Muslims. If having a long beard actually somehow made you more righteous than people without one, then what are men supposed to do who naturally don't have any facial hair? The image of an Islamic identity comes from tradition and culture, not from the Qur'an. Some Muslim women will argue that they wear the hijab to be modest. There is no Qur'anic commandment that indicates that a head covering is required to dress modestly. This misunderstanding may come from incorrect interpretations and translations of the Qur'an. If we look at the first part of verse 31 of Qur'an chapter 24, we find a few English translations where the translator, Pickthall and Yusuf Ali, incorrectly translated the meaning by replacing the word genitals with modesty. The correct translation reads, "And say to the believing women that they should lower their gaze and guard their genitals," Arabic, furujahuna, whereas the Pickthall translation incorrectly reads as, "And tell the believing women to lower their gaze and be modest." And the Yusuf Ali translation incorrectly reads as, "And say to the believing women that they should lower their gaze and guard their modesty." If you are in doubt about the true meaning of the Arabic word furujahunna, then you can verify the correct meaning in Edward Lane's lexicon. Here's a screenshot. As you can see, it means the anterior pudendum of a woman, or the vulva, or external portion of the organs of generation of a woman, and the vagina. To say that the meaning of furujahunna is modesty does injustice to the Qur'an and spreads confusion among innocent Muslims who mistakenly think that they can trust the accuracy of all translations. Logically, covering one's hair doesn't automatically make someone modest. For example, one could wear a fancy hijab with various embellishments such as diamonds, fake or not, and gold patterns like the one shown here. That hardly looks modest. In fact, it looks the opposite of modest. Of course, Muslim women don't dress like that every day, but many do to varying degrees on special occasions. Now let's say that one wears a plain hijab instead of a fancy one, but they also wear makeup to embellish and beautify their face, which many Muslim girls do. If the point of wearing the hijab is to make themselves appear modest, then they've negated that effort by spending probably a considerable amount of time wearing makeup, like in the image shown. Note that wearing makeup is an adornment, zina, which is forbidden according to the first clause of verse 31 of Qur'an chapter 24. If one is concerned about whether they are allowed to dress attractively, then keep in mind that according to verse 26 of Qur'an chapter 7, God actually encourages people to dress attractively because He literally created clothes for two purposes. 1, to cover genitalia, and 2, as an adornment or beauty. Arabic, risha. According to Edward Lane's lexicon, the definition of risha is clothing that signifies ornament and beauty, adornment. If God created clothing so humans can look good in them, intentionally refusing to wear beautiful clothing is akin to not appreciating God's creation. Consider Qur'an chapter 55, which mentions numerous creations of God, followed by the question, so which of the favors of your Lord would you deny? As if to drill it in your brain, that question was repeated 31 times, most likely to emphasize that the good things that God created for people should be appreciated, not denied. Some Muslims will argue that somewhere in the thousands of hadith, there is a saying that requires women to cover their hair. However, contrary to popular belief, the hadith is not a valid source of Islamic law. Proving that is outside the scope of this video, but if I have time, I'll make another video to prove that. Subscribe to this channel to get notified when that video becomes available. Orthodox Jews have certain practices such as male circumcision, particular slaughter methods to produce kosher meat, and shitel, which is the requirement for married women to cover their hair. Muslims have very similar practices even though they are not mentioned in the Qur'an. Unsurprisingly, the Jewish Bible or Torah also does not require women to cover their hair. Rather, this Jewish requirement came from Jewish secondary sources, Talmud. Note that the Jewish Bible or Torah is like the Qur'an, whereas the Jewish Talmud is like the Hadith. This article from myjewishlearning.com goes into detail regarding the Jewish practice and origins of covering one's hair. Based on the similarity between Judaism and Islam and the fact that Judaism came before Islam, it is not unreasonable to believe that some Muslim scholars long ago were influenced by Judaism and adopted these Jewish practices into Islam. To conclude, the analysis explained should make it clear that women are not required to cover their hair, but they are required to cover their breasts. If you're still unsure about whether Muslim women are required to cover their hair or not, just remember verse 26 of chapter 7, which states that the clothing of righteousness, which was defined earlier, is more important than how you choose to cover your body.